Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader, and welcome to the podcast, The Story Oracle. Amanda Johnson coming in all the way from Arizona. How are you, my friend, on this Thursday afternoon for you?
It is Thursday for me. I'm doing pretty well today. It's been a good day.
Excellent. Before we pressed record, we were talking about all sorts of things, including straws and drinking wine through straws. But you're also saying that this time of day for you is not your most strategic or energetic. So, but you said you're going to bring your A game, so that's really good.
I do. I bring my A game, and I do a lot of retreats where, I don't get to stop when my creativity is over. And those 12, 14-hour days are some of my favorite.
Love it.
Conversations are nourishing. So
They are. It's interesting. I was in interstate yesterday doing a leadership program, and I met the head of human resources at the organization afterwards because she's brand new to the company, and she said, "Oh, are you okay to talk after spending the whole day working with my leadership team?" And I said, "Yeah, if I'm talking about a topic that's really passionate and I love it and it's energizing because people are participating and
yep.
and focus on their own development, I can talk for 24 hours."
Yeah, and it's different when you have the energy coming back, right? It kind of refuels the whole conversation or experience.
Absolutely. There is nothing worse, and maybe we'll talk about different styles of communication as part of today's conversation, but there's nothing worse than working with a group of people in a room for a day and they're just not giving you anything, right? They're just you ask them a question, you think, yep, no, and they don't expand. It's like, man, I'm going to work hard today. That's the day that I get really fatigued at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's like when you pick your teenager up from school and ask them how their day was. Fine. Yeah, great. Can I dig deeper?
That's
You got
right.
anything else in there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Amanda, the Story Oracle, also co-founder and CEO of Saved by Story Publishing. You do a lot of work with executives, teams, coaches, consultants on crafting messaging and really bringing that messaging to life. We talked also about some of the people in the expert industry before we press record in terms of authenticity, in terms of their conversations and their messaging. But I love for the audio, I love to delve into people's background as well in terms of, what were you doing before this and what led you to creating the Story Oracle?
Well, people don't go to school for this job. This is kind of a strange little thing that unfolded for me, kind of nudged me along into the expression of my purpose. But I initially was going to be a journalist. I, thought I'll go to school and I'll become a journalist and write for magazines because I was a passionate writer. Then I got to college and I entered a classic books program. And it was at that point that even though I'd been really moved by stories before, but I really saw the power of story while I was in the classic books program. But I also saw the importance of understanding history and
Yeah.
context and knowing what the author was trying to accomplish with whatever story or book they were writing. And so I thought, history is important. It certainly wasn't taught to me properly, nor was the critical thinking. I think I'll be a history teacher. So I got my teaching credential and I went to work as a teacher. And I found myself in quite the quite the scenario. I actually was in a district that was in trouble. Teachers were not supported. The kids were not supported. Most of the kids in my classroom didn't think that they would see graduation day, not
Wow.
because they were failing, but because they were living in gang infested, drug infested neighborhoods,
Yeah.
and couldn't see their way out. I did not have the emotional health or resources to really be able to support them the way I wanted to and be a good mom. And I just had a little boy at home. So
Yeah.
I left that and I got this part-time job as a writing instructor online. I was helping people pass basic skills tests. And I was so excited about the curriculum that she created and how easy it was that I went out to shop the program, tell people about it. Well, I
Yeah.
went to the wrong market. I found myself in a women's networking meeting with a whole bunch of you know, just amazing, high achieving female entrepreneurs. And they said, I don't want to learn how to write well. Exactly. I would really like for you to fix what I've written. And so I created a little editing business, and I was helping people on the side with brochures and manuscripts and website content and all of that stuff, trying to make it more effective. After a few manuscripts, it turned into something where I was realizing, the stories that I was hearing, people were spending so much time writing books
Mm.
and then finding the courage to send it to someone like me. I mean, years would pass between the inspiration and the writing and sharing it with me and getting it edited. So I thought, I could shave a whole lot of time off of these people's experience if I
Yeah.
worked with them from the beginning. So I had this idea. I'll work with them. I'm really good at structuring content. I'll structure the content. I'll give them this really amazing outline, clarify their message. Like, I was so good at this. And then I couldn't get them to do the work. So, because they're all high performing, helping professionals,
Yeah, yeah,
yanked in a bunch of directions, couldn't get
yeah,
anything done. So I said, I need to kidnap with consent. And I created little retreat scenarios. And it was at the retreat scenario that I realized the real reason they weren't opening up their documents. It was because, in order for them to say, this message matters to me, they had to answer the question, why?
yeah.
And the why was the part that had a little bit of pain to it. They did not want to look back at where they came from. They did
Mm.
not want to connect with the reader or the audience to the degree of being able to say, yeah, I was in that pothole too. And this is
Yeah,
what it looked like, felt like, this is what I was telling myself.
yeah.
And so I realized that I was not just going to be a partner in the writing process. I was actually going to be a partner in the story saving or transformational process that was obviously wanting to unfold there.
Wow. So you mentioned before that I'm not sure the words was it an accidental meeting or a meeting at a networking event that you didn't think was relevant or you didn't want to go? What
Yeah.
was the
Yeah, it was a women's, business, women in business networking meeting
Yeah,
locally. And I went there just to start telling people about the services. And I, I wasn't raised with entrepreneurs.
yeah.
I didn't really know the lay of the land. And so, asking around, I was like, oh, there's something happening here. Go see, so knees knocking. I don't know what I'm doing.
He's knocking.
I've been a mom, that was the, I was a mom. You know how it is, that phase of moms when they're like, I don't know if I know how to talk to people anymore. I've been talking baby talk and I've been cleaning up all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, okay, talk to adult humans. And then the pressure of sounding like some sort of expert that they should listen to is, yeah, knees knocking for sure.
Well, and I'm assuming if it's like a lot of the networking events in Australia, you'll be doing the couple of minute elevator pitch, particularly if you're new to the group, depending
Yeah.
on how big it is, of course. Um, that can be quite confronting for a lot of people. And just tell me a little bit about that experience because you mentioned the knees were knocking, and I think if you because you mentioned before, a lot of the people who you were working with in the early days, they didn't necessarily have, I guess, the energy or the willingness to articulate or reveal the why. And it could be for
Mhm.
fear of, I don't know, being
Mhm.
judged or whatever the
Mhm.
case might be. How was that experience for you? Because you just mentioned that you didn't have an entrepreneurial background.
Yeah.
You've gone to a networking event, you're checking it out, bit of curiosity, and then you've been given the opportunity to do a bit of an elevator pitch, right? You're thinking, all
Yeah.
these eyes are on me because you facilitate now, you run workshops and stuff like that, right? Tell me about
Yeah,
that
well, I
experience.
wasn't doing that yet. I
No.
wasn't doing that yet. No, I wasn't. I was just an online writing instructor. So I was just helping people in the background, not even a lot of face to face. And yeah, it was daunting, but I'm a fast learner. And the power of observation has been strong with me since I was little. So I'm really good at seeing the patterns. And so I just, asked to go last. And fortunately, at that meeting, I found my very first author client.
Nice.
And she was a sales coach, had still a sales coach. And we developed a system for future networking because I became her client. So she could teach me all of these things that I did not know, that
Yeah,
I thought I was just going to help people. I
yeah.
didn't realize that I was signing up for all the CEO stuff, the payment portals and the spreadsheets and the sales were like, oh, yuck. No, yeah, I didn't want any of that. So she kind of helped me breathe through the early phases of that. And then I was helping her with her book. So we figured out that if we went to networking meetings together, we could just sell the crap out of each other. Like we were so good at being able to sell each other that we were like, okay, let's do that. So it's one of
Nice,
my fun. Yeah.
nice. It's when you think about it, because as you were talking, this thing that kept coming into my mind was the hero's journey. And when you're explaining before that a lot of the people that you were originally doing some, I guess, editing or reviewing for, and people not wanting to reveal maybe hidden trauma or the fact they came from a less than acceptable in other people's eyes background. That's all part of the hero's journey, which once you embrace
Yep.
that, it's literally from old world to new world and crossing the threshold and meeting the mentors and things like that and preparing for the
Yep.
greatest ordeal. It's a phenomenal story. And when you think about it, and I'd love your take on this in terms
Mhm.
of the people you work with, people tend to resonate with a difficulty that a person, a hero, quote unquote, has experienced. But it's almost like the story of redemption that they've experienced all
Mhm.
that, they've come through, they're still a human being, they're still a normal person, but they've actually achieved
Yeah.
some great things. And hopefully that can kind of create an environment where people look at that and say, well, I could, if that person does that, then I can too.
Yeah.
What was
Yeah,
your experience around
absolutely.
that?
That's exactly what my experience was. And, for years before I actually started helping people from the beginning, I had stepped into a facilitator training program where we were helping young people get all of that social emotional literacy. And I realized there that story was the absolute best way to connect with them.
Mm,
And that I had the hardest time doing it because I hadn't even looked back at my story. That wasn't, it wasn't, if you think about this 20 years ago, it wasn't, the story wasn't a thing.
mm.
It's so trendy now. People are talking about how story connects you, and there's all this neurobiology research, and it's just, it's amazing. Story is like the thing. 20 years ago, I mean, this was kind of cutting edge, the people
Yeah,
who were using story to move rooms, facilitate transformation, move people to the back of the room for sales.
yeah,
And I felt like I was kind of on the early side of that. And it was so hard for me because I'd spent years technical training, organizing my content, my thoughts. And
yeah.
this, that the longest trip from the head to the heart was absolutely true for me because I just felt like I feel like an imposter.
Mm,
I feel so when my clients started to show up and say, I will lose every ounce of credibility if I tell that story. It was a lot of work to explain to them, and not just explain to them because you can tell someone that this is so, and you can even give them experiences of sitting in circle with other people and realizing, oh yeah, that didn't really change
mm.
the way I felt about you negatively. In fact, it made me feel more connected. So creating experiences where they could feel that with each other,
Yeah,
but also, giving them the opportunity to share in this space and to get that type of feedback. It created those disconfirming experiences so they could see people were actually leaning in more and they
mm,
really appreciated and enjoyed the relationships that they were building in the community even more than what they had out there.
yeah,
Because when you're talking about hero's journey, one of the things that I realized very early was that, and I think we were talking about this before we hit record too, um, superpowers are often born out of tragedy or trauma,
yeah.
right? Something happens, the nervous system gets hijacked, and someone has to survive, and they become
Mm,
very good at it. And so there are a lot of high performing, high achieving, award winning people out there who still have these things inside that why would they look at it? They're running giant endeavors and enterprises and changing people's lives. And yet when the call comes to write a book and share the
yeah,
message at a different level and tell the story, there it is right there. It's the
yeah,
shadowy underbelly
yeah,
of their superpower.
yeah. But if they're able to uh maybe get over the I don't know, that self-protectionism to think, well, actually, I want to not reveal that because it's potentially a weakness, or maybe people will judge me. If they get over that and realize that it's actually part of the story
Mhm.
and it's the relatability, because I mean, every person I speak to who's an expert in selling, in influence, in branding, and so forth, whether it be individually or corporately, we always talk about this concept of people do business with you because they know you, they like you, they trust you, but
Mhm.
also they remember you. So it's a case of, well, what do I have in my background? What do I have in my experiences that can be relatable? And this is not about making things up. Everyone's got a story,
Right.
right? So how
I've
can you
seen that though.
well, and because I mean, in Australia, similar to the US, people's bullshit meters are pretty good, right? So you can,
They are now.
and the issue with that is, and we said this before we press record, you've got to be authentic, right? So
Mhm.
if you're going around trying to remember, oh, what was that story I told Amanda the other day? I've got to try and remember what it was. Yeah, it was that, and oh, there it is. People can realize pretty quickly that it's not real. And so trying to tap into that can be very not only cathartic for the individual, but it adds credibility to the people who are listening that, hey, I'm a human being. And if they
Mhm.
relate to that, they're more likely to be in a position to be influenced ethically.
Yeah, absolutely. And that piece that you're talking about how do you get to the place where you're actually willing to do that, right? Because I mean, so many lessons at that first retreat, I realized there's no way that I'm going to ask people to show up and then get into the work. They have to come the night before
Yeah.
and get all of their stuff out of the way. Because they would come in, dressed all nice and manicured and like their persona,
Yes.
and that would be what I was engaging all day, and I
Yeah.
couldn't I
Yeah.
couldn't get past it, and I
Yeah.
needed to get past it for
Yeah.
what we were doing. And
Yeah.
so if I could get them in the night before and we could connect and over dinner, low pressure, we're not doing any work, we can start sharing stories and we
Yeah.
can start connecting. And so thinking about that in terms of story and sales, like how do you create that amount of safety for
Mm.
people to really trust that you're not just good at what you do as far as getting people to sign away some of their money, but you're actually going to be there on the other side to help them.
Yes.
you know that's a big thing, especially when you're talking about big projects like growing a business or writing a book, and you need that level of partnership because you don't have the mastery when you
Mm.
start out. You have mastery over here, but you feel like an absolute novice over here, and how do you hold on to this and learn this at the same time? It's kind of tricky.
Yeah, it is. And I love how you talk about bringing people in with all of their character traits. They've got their uniforms on, their capes,
Yes.
their facades,
Yes.
and you break it all down. And I'm sure that when they leave, that it's an experience that they probably will never forget, but they'll also be changed in terms of how they see themselves, and through that process, how others will start to see them because they see
Yeah.
themselves differently, which is
Mhm.
really cool.
Yeah, and it's tricky too because if you think about these people who have this persona, right? They've been sometimes for 15, 20, 30 years. They've had this identity that is high performing, just like people look at their lives and think, wow, right?
Mm.
And then they get into a space and they reveal that it's not all wow. There
Yeah,
is a lot of wow. They're great at what they do. They're making a huge difference and they
yeah.
should own all of that. But this part over here, it is not wow, and it needs
Uh,
help. And so when they go back to their lives, they have to rebuild their identity. They have to learn how to figure out how to expand it and open up those places, because you can't just, go from a very, wonderful, even relational, but mostly transactional experience with
mm.
people, and then bring in story and not have them go, wait a minute, what's happening here? That has to be done at a deeper level where
Yeah,
they're comfortable with it and they're not using it in order to do something. They're
yeah.
using it for themselves.
Absolutely, because that becomes more genuinely authentic
Yeah.
rather than it fabricated, which
Yeah.
points to then credibility. So, man, I wanted to ask you because I know you work with a lot of coaches, entrepreneurs, founders. We do a lot of work in the corporate space, and big organizations that are selling to big organizations, and there's been a lot of talk particularly in recent years, about how do we bring storytelling into big corporate sort of organizations. And I'd love your take on this in terms of your perspective around I guess, the balance between, we've got these fantastic products and all the training typically is given to people around that product. So they're really good at the product sell.
Mhm.
But how do we bring story into, the big organizations, because I wanted to see if there's some key principles or structural breakdowns that make what you consider to be a great story, irrespective of whether you're a high performing salesperson, a founder, an individual, an entrepreneur, whatever you. But when you look at sales, and I know you
Mhm.
talk a bit about safety in sales, how does story play a slightly different role in big organizations, or is it still the same, I guess, concepts and principles that if you're working with individuals?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different. So what you're talking about reminds me of I stepped into a room more than a decade ago with a whole bunch. I want to say there were maybe 50 to 75 entrepreneurs at different stages. So some of them were just, solo entrepreneurs running their enterprise by themselves. Some of them were involved in um, big products and services sort of businesses that they were running at a very high level. And what was hilarious was the facilitator the first day said, "Now I want you to think about the story that's going to connect you with your client." Now, everyone thought of like the worst story that they had because, and you knew it because you could feel it in the room.
Yeah,
These people who were so successful all turned into like 3, 5, 10 year olds who were doing, slinking underneath the desk there, the table that they were sitting at. Like, I don't. So we kind of lost the room the first day, and she said, "Is there a way for you to get it back?" And I said, "Sure, but I'm going to need like 2 hours." And part of it was, we all have those stories, right?
yeah,
Those
yeah,
stories. And if you're a thought leader who is sharing a message that comes straight from your story and your expertise, but straight from your story, then that depth of storytelling is pretty deep. Like you
mm,
can really take people there because you know that the audience is feeling that sort of pain too. But if you're in an organization selling a product, then maybe you don't want to tell like your toughest story ever. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Hence the reason why you see mostly testimonials of other people using the product, or
yeah,
I use this and this is how it benefited me. Now, if you have those experiences, it's better to say, this helped me to lose 30 pounds and now I feel great. That's one level of storytelling. But if you went at depth to talk about the shame that was attached, the starts and stops that it took, the head trash you had to listen to before you
yeah,
got this product that worked, right? You can always make it more at depth, but it doesn't mean that you need to share that biggest
yeah,
story. And
yeah,
and I know I haven't done a whole lot of work in big organizations, but one of the things that I really hope to bring is the use of story as a connector inside of the teams
mm,
and with the leaders.
yeah,
Because I just think, in our own space, when we can use story to talk about some of the things that feel unspeakable, in a culture like something's happening, that leader is how do we address that? Well, okay, let's use popular stories to kind of create space to help people sort it out. What is it really? Because all people can really do is feel it.
yeah.
Sometimes they can point to behavior, but how do we humanize each other? What better way to do that than through story?
Oh, it's such a good point because everybody has a story, and some of those stories are real, and I say this respectfully. A lot of the stories are manufactured because of all the
Mm,
stuff that has built up over many years, often because of what other people have fed us in terms of belief systems or whatever the case might be and experiences. So we end up telling ourselves a story, and the more we tell ourselves a story, the more we believe that it's actually true, and that
yeah.
becomes who we are. So your example of how do I do that in a bigger organization is a really important one because individuals need to have credibility built in order for teams to want to follow them. And I say this to
Yeah.
leaders all the time. Are your team following you because they have to, because the org structure says they have to? Or are they following you because they choose to follow you? And that's the big difference. And many people will follow you because you're authentic. You're not pretending to be somebody you're not. You're taking off that cape and potentially revealing yourself to be somebody that perhaps they didn't know you were, but all
Mhm.
of a sudden it's like, oh my God, it's Amanda's a real person. All of a sudden the credibility meter goes through the roof.
Yeah.
So it's really
And
important.
and I think so does the productivity, because I think there are a lot of leaders, out there who are pretending like they're doing all of the things well and they're just not,
Yeah.
and it's such a relief to be able to say, these are my superpowers. I am so good at this, this, and this. These are my shadows. Do not let me near a spreadsheet. My son knows this. He's my business partner now. Do not let me near all of these things, right? Because I will freeze up. I will suddenly lose access to all of my superpowers. And I think that, being able to speak in that language and make it really archetypal and honest from that
Mm.
perspective gives people the opportunity to really see who they're working with and to say, oh, maybe they're acting like a jerk because they're really scared that they're going to be found out. Maybe that's what it was.
Possibly.
And now that we know, like, why are you doing that? We can do that for you. We're great at
Yeah.
that. That'll take 2 seconds,
That's
and all
it.
of a sudden
That's
the
it.
team relaxes.
And so, how important, therefore, is it, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a business person, whether you're just a human being, to really understand and dive deep into the story to identify what those superpowers are? And when we say superpowers, you don't have to be world class. It's the things that you're really passionate about and you have an aptitude or a skill set for.
Mhm.
That if you double down on that and focused on it more, you could increase your productivity, have better influence, serve more people, etc., etc. So identifying what your zones of genius are, how important is that, do you think, for an individual as a catalyst to grow a business, to grow a tribe, to grow a foundation, whatever the case might be, to increase your influence?
I think it's the most important thing because if you're not clear on that, then you don't really understand the value that you're bringing. And you can still do great work. My very first client, brilliant sales coach. I mean, she NLP trained, like she was getting the best results with everybody. When I sat down with her after networking with her all of those times and looked at her outline, I was like, where's the part about connection and networking? And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, that is your genius. Like,
Yeah.
I have been watching you and paying attention to how you do this and what's the pattern. Like, this is actually the thing. You have all
Mm,
these formulas and stuff that works for everybody. But see, when people get to hang out with you, they get to watch and sort of learn and co regulate to that energy and mimic,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if they're reading a book and you leave that part out, guess what happens to your message? So, some people, it comes so naturally, those superpowers, that they don't really own that as
Mm,
part of not only what makes them great, but what they need to continue, sharing with their audience who's trying
yeah.
to learn from them.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, with that, love to know. Obviously, you work according to a formula, because you are the oracle. So, if you're thinking about, because I'd love to know, and certainly for my benefit, but also for the listeners' benefit, in terms of when you're working with coaches, entrepreneurs, business people, organizations, small teams, large teams, when we're thinking about crafting a story or extracting a story from the deep recesses of somebody's cranium that's been pushed down for so many years, for so many, and all these different layers you just have to remove.
Yeah.
What are some, not so much the structure per se, but some key principles that you use and that others can use to try to identify and pinpoint, whether it be events, principles, to actually help bring out that story?
Yeah. So lots of different ways that I've tried this over the years and kind of used a combination of these things now. One thing is the power of actually writing with your hand.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can do things like create a timeline. I always tell people, start creating a timeline because I need to know your story from start to finish. So, create that timeline, bullet points, high level. And the fascinating thing is people who have those big stories and traumas and tragedies in the background, they really struggle with the timeline. And sometimes you have to get at the memory through other means. Like I had
Yeah.
this high performing Mary Kay salesperson. She's phenomenal at what she does. But
Yeah.
she was writing about what was happening in her personal life in the background. And it was so traumatic and so hard that she could not remember the events that happened until I said, what happened in personally about the time that you became this level of director? And then she
Yeah.
knew, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, this disruption happened.
Yeah.
So timelines and then writing. If you
Mm,
really want to excavate, I really don't think that there's any modality that will help you to get deeper and tell yourself the truth that you are trying to protect yourself from better than writing, because all of that memory is in the body and
Yeah.
it just comes out. And if you can get past the point where you're consciously thinking about what you're writing and just go, it will tell you things that
Yeah.
you don't remember. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's it's interesting because a lot of people journal, and you hear
Hmm.
things about, whoa, have a gratitude journal, or have a whatever journal. Uh, but if you think about it, a lot of us are visual learners, but a lot of us also have visual with kinesthetic as well. So
Yes.
the act of writing is, and even though for myself I have terrible writing, which goes back to when I was at university, I find that when I write things down, so when I do a workshop, for example, I cannot look at a structure that is on PowerPoint. I have to always do a flow that I write, right? Because when I write that, I own it, which
It's
means
like
I
mine.
could almost
Yeah.
deliver it unconsciously because I've written it, because it's come out of
Yep.
here and it's onto
100%.
paper. Um,
It's
and I
huge.
think that's a really powerful thing,
Mhm.
and
I've
less and
also
less people are
had
doing it.
people I've also had people who really struggle with the writing piece. Like they're not like you to your point, they're not really words people. And so I've asked, sometimes I'll have them draw certain parts of their life. So, like, what are the seven defining moments of your life? Draw
Mm,
them. Now, that's really confronting
yeah.
because then you're using shapes and colors and those sorts of things to try to capture emotion. That's sometimes even more than writing for people. I've been in many a room, that one that I talked about with the wildly successful business owners, where I gave them that exercise and then I watched them build the technology wall around them. You know, the phone came up on its rest and the iPad came up, the laptop opened. I was like, you don't need any of those things to
Uh,
draw. What is happening? You know? But it's another way to kind of get in, and the drawing is still using the hand, it's still accessing what's in the body and that emotion. So certainly I think that those are probably the three top ways I would suggest starting to get into the story.
Love it. And when you then identify those key events, whether it be drawing, writing down bullet points, getting out of here, getting out of the body onto paper, um, if you then say, okay, we've identified these events, some of them might have been really positive events, there might have been some not so positive events, there might have been some trauma and some tragedy as part of the story. How do we then structure that to the point where, because the question I've got, um, and particularly when it comes to influencing others,
Mhm.
how do I go about identifying which part of my story is going to be relevant to the message I'm trying to put out to an individual or to a marketplace?
Mhm. Yeah, that to me, that's just a matter of knowing who that avatar is. You know, who are they? What phase of life are they in? You know, my book about being an upside down mommy was for someone in their early 20s or early stages of parenting. But my book about messages was probably going to be more connective with the people who had accomplished a good many things and were trying to turn around and give that away. So I
Yeah.
think it's about knowing exactly who that person is that you're writing to, and maybe even choosing one that you're writing um, to know where to start. Like, what is the pain that they're in, or what
Mm,
is the aspiration? And does it have to do with something career? Does it have to do, or do you need to open up the dimensions? Hey, I see you, high performing professional, killing it out there, going home, falling asleep, numbing yourself with food, right? Like all of these things, wondering why you can't get your stuff together over here the way that you do over there. I see you, I know
mm,
you.
mm.
So yeah, I think it's a matter of really connecting with the avatar at that point.
So here's a question for you around story and metaphor. Because there'll be people listening to this, and I've gone through all the NLP training, trainers training, all that sort of stuff. Right? We talked a lot about story, we talked a lot about analogies, and we talked a lot about open loop metaphors and things like that. Um, the use of metaphors, and do you see metaphors differently to story? Because what I'm thinking as you were talking about that, there may be some things that we can draw upon from our own experience, which is our own story, which does add a credibility. But there's also opportunities to create metaphors or to utilize other people's story when you've identified that avatar to hopefully start to invoke an emotion or some form of feeling that can help them move at least a step in the right direction, with the premise that everything we're talking about is done ethically and not
Mhm.
unethical manipulation.
Right.
So, from your perspective, how does story and metaphors work together, or are they completely separate?
I don't think they're separate. I do think that it's a matter of leaning into one or the other a little more, depending on who you're talking to. So, if, like I said, if you're an individual thought leader talking about a story that brought you to that moment, then telling it truly, honestly, is probably your best bet for making that connection. I know a lot of thought leaders who've written fiction novels that are kind of those metaphorical sort of journeys through their story. But I always read those and thought, well, that's cool, but I really want to know the person,
Yeah,
especially if I'm going to sign up to work with that person to learn something
yeah.
from them. I think it's possible. One of my clients wrote this book. He wrote it in about 30 days because he had a prognosis. He had 30 days left, and he called me. He said, I can't leave this planet with this still on me, like in me. It
Whoa.
has to get out of me. And I was like, okay, we'll just take everything else off my desk and we'll figure that out. And it was such a privilege to walk beside him. But one of the things that he did was he wrote it almost like a a story where he was all of the characters, which I thought was really
Yeah,
fascinating.
okay.
He was the young business professional who was like losing everything because he didn't have systems built into his business, and he's ready to lose his marriage and his kids don't like him, all these things. And he was the mentor who showed up in his world and kind of coached him through this process. And it was such a powerful example because you really felt the truth of him being both characters because he'd
Mm.
been there. He'd been the person who had a mentor step in and save him, and he'd been the person who'd done that for the last 20 years. And being able to watch the dialogue that happened and the compassion, the empathy. I mean, it was a master class in leadership and coaching.
That's phenomenal because one of the things we talk to leaders all the time about is how to appreciate, be really curious and demonstrate empathy and put yourselves in the shoes of other people to try to see things through their perspective, through their eyes. And to do that in the written form, that would have taken, I mean, I cannot imagine the courage that would have taken for him with that prognosis to be able to do that and have such an impact. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah,
What a
it was
legacy.
a beautiful journey.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing book. And it's funny because he wrote it to the avatar of who he was, but he actually had the extra audience that he didn't realize he was going to get, which was all of the coaches and people who realized that he had something special about the way he was mentoring,
Yeah.
and they got to watch his process in action.
Wow. So I'm conscious you've got meetings to get to. So
Mhm.
I wanted to ask a question for people listening to this, whether they are struggling with their own story, or struggling with articulating a message to a market.
Mhm.
Is there one, and you've already talked about getting stuff and the power of the writing with your hand. Is there one piece of, I guess, advice or guidance, not so much is the non-negotiable, but that can help people at least take the first or second step towards trying to bring out that story and trying to change the way they're communicating?
Mhm. So a few answers to that. One is, it's funny that you asked that right after I talked about Ruben, this author, because he had 30 days left. um his his level of clarity was like none I had ever seen. Like, I'd been working with him for years, and he knew his stuff but not how to deliver it.
Yeah,
And then when he got that prognosis, it was like, clear, I see it. And that became one of my questions that I ask people a lot is, if you knew that you only had 30 days left, what story would you not want to leave the planet with
yeah.
inside of you? What message would you hope to leave for your children, for your clients, for your colleagues, for your industry? And to me, that's just this really clarifying, just helps you to get right there real fast.
Which is, I don't want to end this on a morbid note, but hey, it's a,
Powerful.
because it's very powerful because we think, hey, I'll do that tomorrow. We've got heaps of time, right? But
Mhm.
when you think about it, if I only had a certain amount of time, and there was a book that was written by a KPMG executive many years ago called Chasing Daylight, and I think his prognosis was 90 days, and
Mm.
he was wanting to write his story and leave something. If you had that, what would be the message you want to leave
Mhm.
the future generations,
Yeah.
or your kids, or your friends, or your business, or whatever the case might be? If only we actually had that attitude to say that, and this is not to say you're not going to be here in 30 days' time, but if you had
Mhm.
that attitude, all of a sudden the stuff you're doing, such as the email, such
Mhm.
as whatever the thing, the non-urgent tasks, you just forget about that and just focus on the message at hand.
100%. Yeah, that was I mean, working alongside him, I always say I feel like it changed me at a cellular level
Yeah,
to watch someone whose physical body was in such rapid decline and to watch someone whose soul was so big
yeah,
and so committed to leaving something. And I think we all have that inside of us, that that hero that wants to say, look, I haven't figured it all out, but I do have some elixir because I've been on some journeys. Let me share it with you. And it
absolutely.
does. It changed the way that I wrote my business goals from there on out. It changed the way that I managed my time and my energy between home and work.
Yeah.
It changed everything to be thinking about it with that lens. And
Uh,
you know, I guess it could be felt to be morbid, but it was really beautiful to witness, and it was life changing for me as a as an entrepreneur and a leader.
yeah, I love that. And I guess the message I take from that is that irrespective of people's backgrounds, irrespective of, what they think, everybody has a story. And it's not about trying to compare your story with somebody else. Oh man, I don't have as big a story as Amanda, so therefore I can't be as credible. Well, your story is your story. How about you get it out, own
Yeah.
it, be proud of it, utilize it, understand you're on the hero's journey, and use it for good. Get
Yeah.
out there and get it done.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it doesn't feel like a big enough story, write it down and then go write a bigger story, you know?
That's all right. Go, go and
I mean,
go and create more
I
havoc.
always think
That's right. Now, we're not advocating making massive mistakes, but mistakes
no,
is part of the journey, so that's all
it
good.
is. Go bigger, you know?
Go
If you
bigger.
wanna if you wanna leave a big story, go bigger.
That's it. That's it. So, hey, I love this conversation. I'm conscious you've got to head off,
Yeah.
but if people want to know more about you, more about the Story Oracle, connect with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
I'm actually going to direct them over to savedbystory.house. It's a writing and publishing house that we have helping people from inspiration to impact.
Yeah,
And there is if they / foreshadows, they'll see a page with a whole bunch of free offerings just to kind of see where they need a little bit of clarity and see if they
yeah,
can get the journey started.
nice, awesome. Amanda, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing some tidbits of wisdom, and yeah, keep up the fantastic work. And thanks for being a guest
Thank
on the
you.
Exceptional Sales Leader podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation. Loved it.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.